Good morning, college football fans. Hope you got your coffee. It was a late one last night, even later one for my co-hosts, Matt Zenitz and John Talty, here on First Down South, which is presented by Andrew Sports Medicine, who sponsored all of our national championship game coverage. We're finally through the national championship, and we're through the 2020 college football season. And we were here with you yesterday previewing this game. I think a lot of us felt like it was going to be a tough challenge for Alabama. I think we thought this was going to be a slugfest out there. And even though I think Ohio State definitely showed plenty of signs that they were a competitive team and that they belonged in the game. It didn't last too long as the game went on, and Alabama asserted itself with one of the more dominant wins that we've ever seen in a national championship game. So to start us off here, guys, John Talty, you were in the stadium. You were in Miami last night. What was the energy like? I mean, I realize you've got that limited crowd there, but take me through kind of what was happening in the press box and elsewhere as it's beginning to dawn on folks that Alabama is taking control of this game in a big way.
Yeah, well, first I just want to say it's interesting as I look at myself in this video screen here. It feels like, when you see a president at the beginning of their tenure and then at the end. That's how I feel like if you found a photo of me at the beginning of 2020 and now how I look now, that's what this football season has done. I feel like I've aged a couple of years, but it was just bizarre being at that stadium last night, just because things that we're used to were just not there. I mean, it wasn't obviously a packed stadium. It was a limited based on that. In the press box itself were these huge, kind of partitions blocking, plastic basically all around you, blocking, each person from each other. Typically, I believe, it's 700 to 800 media people. And there was less than 200 from what I was told at last night's game. So, just a lot less people. And, we'll get into more of the game in a second. But, Michael Casagrande, one of our AL.com colleagues, and I were talking about this after the game, just how bizarre it was to watch Alabama celebrate the game from the press box. Because typically, everyone here, we've covered multiple national championships. We're usually on the field. You're getting right up there. You're right in almost the middle of it as guys are running around celebrating. Scalise, famous for being the guy who hands out newspapers that you guys probably see at the end of games. Everybody holds up. I've had that duty as well. And so just watching it all play out from the press box kind of removed was in some ways very, bizarre for me, just having covered some of these. But, I don't think anyone in the press box was shocked by what was happening. I think you saw pretty early on that Justin at the level that he probably needed to be to win. And so it kind of felt, as time went on, it just felt more and more inevitable that Alabama was going to win.
And some of that buildup started in the pregame too, even though we from the reporting that the two of you did, we had some idea that there could be some issues for Ohio State coming into this game. But in the final minutes before kickoff, Matt Zenitz, we started getting this news, and it just sort of felt like it was cascading. You suddenly hear, that Ohio State's kicker says he's not going to be there tonight. Then you hear about multiple defensive linemen. Then we get the total number of guys from Ohio State that are not available for the game. It really did feel like as the final minutes ticked off to the game, that all of the news for Ohio State was bad and all of it was good for Alabama for the most part.
Well, I think it's fair to say that the biggest thing John Talty is still trying to comprehend right now, and we should go back to the full screen look for this one so we can get Talty's reaction. The biggest thing he's still trying to comprehend is how I got the brick wall with me down to Miami and how I managed to pull that off.
It's a green screen.
Trying to process that.
Yeah.
Drinking aside, it was interesting, not to get completely off topic. So for me, all of the previous Alabama national championship games have been there in person for that. For this one, watched it from home, which even though I did a lot from home this year in terms of Saturdays, it felt really weird watching a national championship game at home, while at the same time hanging out with the wife and hearing about agenda for the next day and watching the 18-month-old to go along with that. But at the same time, it's still just crazy to me that we were able to get to this point, because 6 months ago, I don't know how many people would have confidently predicted that we would be able to get to where we were last night and where we are right now, having successfully gotten through a college football season. In terms of Ohio State, completely agree. So what John and I had heard about specifically in terms of the position group that was most of concern, or the biggest issue for them, was the D-line group. It came out right before the game, the specific players that were going to be out within that defensive line group. But regardless of the players that were missing for them, I think it was just further confirmation last night that the best team in college football this year is now the national champion, and a very deserving national champion. And to go along with that, while Nick Saban has had some great teams at Alabama, obviously you can make a strong case that this is the best Alabama team that he's had. And to go along with that, probably one of the best teams in recent college football history, especially when you factor in, you guys know I love stats, so this is a stat I'll throw out there. So played 11 SEC teams this year to go along with Notre Dame and Ohio State, two teams obviously ranked in the top 4, made the playoff. Facing the combination of those 13 teams, Alabama outscored them by an average margin of 49-19, and there was only one game this year that was decided by less than 15 points. That's pretty ridiculous.
Lane Kiffin's ready to hang that banner.
From somebody last night, I give love to, who is it? Alex Kirshner, I think, that put that out. Guy with Maryland ties, just like John and myself. He put something out about how, based on what Ole Miss did against Alabama and somebody else, that they're essentially the de facto number 2 at this point, should be number 2 in the AP poll. So
I mean, we will certainly get into where Alabama's team this year fits into the discussion about all-time college football accomplishments. But before we do that, I do want to kind of dig into some of the specific things that happened in this game and what your reactions were to them. I think, first of all, offensively, this game looked a lot like every other game that we've seen for Alabama. But as the game went on, they had to adapt and changes had to be made, because Devontae Smith, going out essentially right at the beginning of the second half with that dislocated finger, what looks like a dislocated finger anyway, really, he had become such a focal point of the offense over the final few weeks of the season. And even more so, it appeared at the beginning of this game, where, Ohio State fans are screaming on Twitter in the first half of this game, how are we not covering the Heisman Trophy winner? And I'm sure there's a lot of schematic explanations for why he was as open as he was. But look, clearly Devontae Smith was a huge part of their game plan coming into this game. And then you're without him in the second half, and Mac Jones and the Alabama offense finds a way to continue moving the ball and scoring.
Do you know John, the issue? Yeah. The issue, if you look specifically at that third Devontae Smith touchdown where he got meshed up against the linebacker, I think Ohio State realized pretty quickly that they should not put somebody with similar speed characteristics as Matt Scalisi or Devontae Smith, and probably realized that more and more as the play was progressing.
I think you're being unkind to that poor linebacker, because
that's what I envisioned. Matt Scalisi looking, trying to cover Devontae.
No,
Smith.
I think that I would have had multiple hash marks between me and Devontae Smith almost immediately. So he did as best as he could for a man of those dimensions. But
the great thing that I saw, somebody put out a tweet that I like, that midway or right when Devontae Smith got even and started separating more, that essentially you saw the check engine light coming on for that Ohio State.
Yes, very good analogy. Yeah.
Shout out Bunky Perkins.
That's your award.
There he is.
Yeah, that was a quality.
Yeah, I mean, look, what I'm curious about from you guys is what you saw from this offense after Devontae Smith. It'd be easy for us to sit here and talk about the incredible dominant first half that Devontae Smith had. It's already been talked about, I think. What kind of sticks out to me about this game and what I think will be a memorable part of this game are the contributions that were made by the rest of the team when they lose, once again, the best player on the roster.
Yeah. You know who deserves some love? So people, obviously, it's very easy to pay attention to Mac Jones, Devontae, Najee Harris, John Mechie, some of these guys who obviously have gotten a lot of love throughout the course of the year. But somebody who probably deserves a little bit more credit than I think they're getting right now is Chris Owens, who stepped into a difficult situation, replacing an All-American center, the top center in college football this year. And guess what? During the course of the last couple of games, we didn't hear Chris Owens' name too much. So that went from being an area where it was fair to be concerned about for Alabama to being a complete non-issue, where literally didn't hear Chris Owens' name once during the course of the last 2 games and didn't notice him for anything negative. And that's probably the biggest compliment that you could give to an offensive lineman. They did not stick out.
Yeah, I'll give you another guy who I think deserves more credit than he's gotten, Pete Golding. And we can get into that, in more later. I know we're talking offense here, but I just think, so criticized, I would say, all year. And obviously Trace Sermon going out made his job a little bit easier. But I thought Golding had a very good game and found ways to get pressure on Fields. Christian Barmore obviously had a great game. And this defense, even Saban said kind of afterwards, like, they had an okay defense this year. It was the offense that carried them. But I do think the defense stepped up multiple times in that game where it kind of felt going in that, just getting a stop or two could be the difference. And they got multiple, which, with the offense doing what it was doing, Ohio State just could not keep up. And I think the defense deserves credit for that. So I think Golding, who's had an up and down, I would say, time, certainly with Alabama fans, is, ending that year in a high note.
For sure.
Just to follow up on what you were saying, John, I completely agree with you that defense deserves a lot of credit for last night also, and just how they came along ever since the game against Ole Miss. But if you look at last night specifically, that was an offense that has so many future NFL guys on it, including a potential top 10 pick at quarterback, that he had just thrown 6 touchdowns or whatever it was against Clemson. They had put up 49 points as an offense against a very talented Clemson defense. And you hold that offense to 24 points, less than 400 yards of total offense, and Justin Fields to a very, very modest stat line where I don't even think he reached 200 yards in terms of throwing the football. So I completely agree with you that Pete Golding deserves credit. Christian Barmore may have moved himself up into being a top 15 draft pick even more based on what he did last night, looking like the college version of Chris Jones from the Kansas City Chiefs out there. The defense definitely contributed to that last night and overall to this national championship run based on how they came along ever since that game against Ole Miss.
One more item from the game before we start talking about kind of the bigger picture here. Jaylen Waddle was obviously a huge story leading up to the game. We see him out there pretty early on that 3rd down play where it's a very weird play that it almost felt improvised as it was happening, where Mac Jones kind of runs towards the line to gain and then dumps it off to Jaylen Waddle as he's kind of streaking towards the sidelines. Felt like maybe an easy way to get Waddle some space and to help him make a positive play early on the game. And he immediately comes up limping. And, obviously you guys were both focused on the game. I was seeing the reaction nationally on social media, and it was pretty negative for the most part. I think there were a lot of Alabama fans who were really excited to see it happen, but there were a lot of people not connected to the team that are kind of their immediate reaction was to yell, get him out of there. This is not right. He shouldn't be playing. Shame on Alabama for putting him out there. Kid's got to think about his career. But Jaylen Waddle came in multiple other snaps throughout the game. He continued to come in and make plays. He had ended the game with 3 catches. Another one later in the game for a fairly crucial 1st down to keep a drive alive. So Jaylen Waddle, look, there's no question watching him, he was not 100%. He was playing through probably some pretty intense discomfort. And do you guys feel, I guess that would be my question to you guys, is How do you feel watching that happen? Because ultimately, as we've been told over and over again, it was Jaylen Waddle's decision to play.
Yeah, I think the Alabama medical staff does a terrific job, and they were very careful throughout the course of this entire process with him, and evaluated him during the course of pregame warmups. After finishing up with pregame warmups, had a conversation with Jaylen and his family, and made a final determination as to whether he could go out there. But one thing I can say very confidently, and not only this situation, but any situation from a medical standpoint, Alabama would not put him out there if there was any concern whatsoever in terms of re-injuring or putting the player at further risk related to that specific injury. And that was definitely the case with Jaylen Waddle last night. So I think from a confidence standpoint, that obviously that was a work in progress, considering it was his first time going out there and playing football since fracturing his ankle October 24th. So I think there was some reluctance, or not reluctancy, but that he probably was working back to a point where he was confident doing everything that he would typically do, and probably just felt some discomfort during the course of the game as he was getting back to doing that for the first time since injury. But I can say 100% that there was not concern as far as re-injuring that or making it worse. Otherwise, they would not have put him out there.
John, we even talked about it Tuesday morning, and essentially what he said was that, Waddle's straight line speed was pretty close to what it should be at. His issues, or I guess, or challenges, were cutting, because you got to put weight on that ankle to cut, and then also decelerating, trying to slow down once you get revved up. And so they tried. He's talked about how they tried to basically do things to limit that stuff, and also being able to just capitalize on the fact he's incredibly fast. And so they didn't do that much with him. You could tell he was somewhat, hampered by just that ankle. And Saban himself said that, like, he had that injury too. And so he knew, it's just that ankle's going to be tight. It's going to be tough to get it fully loose to, again, do the things that you're used to doing. But like Matt said, I don't think that Alabama would put him in a position if they didn't think he was okay to play. And ultimately, I do think they deferred in some regard to Jaylen really wanting to play in this game. And I don't think, anything we saw during that game, even though at times it looked like he wasn't 100%, made it a bad decision.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense when you say that, the decelerating part, because it did seem like that he really was running, like we would have expected to see from Jaylen Waddle of old on those crossing routes. It's after he's out of bounds that he sort of seemed to pull up, and I guess that's just putting a lot more strain on that ankle to slow down. He's basically the guy from Mighty Ducks 2 who's an incredible skater but he doesn't know how to stop. That's what he became here.
If they got him loose, just keep running through that tunnel.
Yeah. Who was the D2 character? I can't even remember his name. Luis? Wait, what was
I believe his name was Luis. Yes, he was a Latino gentleman from D2, the Mighty Ducks. Yeah,
and had the big goal in the championship game too, where he did stop. So he learned.
Guys, spoiler alerts! I was going to watch that.
Jaylen Waddle also. So obviously, in any situation like this, Alabama's going to do their due diligence, and there's a lot that goes into the process of determining whether it's even safe or realistic for a player to get back out there. And one of the interesting things that was mentioned to me during the course of the build-up to the game was obviously Alabama uses the catapult system, the GPS system, and I guess Jaylen had indicated to people that his numbers were similar or maybe even better in terms of like straight line stuff than they were pre-injury, and were closer than than people may think based off last night in terms of some of the lateral stuff to go along with that. So that was part of the decision-making process for them behind the scenes. But I found that interesting just in terms of some of those numbers, that 11 weeks removed from fracturing his ankle, that he was back to a point where he was as good or better from a straight line standpoint and close when it came to the lateral stuff to go along with that.
Bodes very well for his draft stock for sure. And we'll be hearing more about that, I'm sure, in the coming weeks and months. Let's move on to kind of the bigger picture here for Alabama, which is the conversation that's already happening and that you guys are writing about in a lot of the pieces that you're doing for AL.com about this team's legacy, their place in history. We've been hesitant to dive into this subject too early. I've brought it up in show planning a few times, and you guys sort of have wisely said, let's wait till the championship. And, I think at this point, this Alabama team is actively part of the discussion of, is this the best team in college football history? The players were asked about it last night. They all obviously agreed that it is. But what would be your argument, I guess, and kind of which direction are you leaning? I know obviously you guys both covered this team, so you've got a little bit of a different perspective on it. But do you feel like this is a comparison that's going to stick and it's going to hold up?
Well,
I always hate comparing not to cut you off, John. I always hate comparing teams from different eras, because who knows what this Alabama team would have looked like against, like, for example, the 2000 Miami team or the USC teams with Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush, and all of them. I think it'd be a hell of a game, but I think it's tough to make those comparisons. One thing I will say is this was as dominant of a team from beginning to end in terms of the season as any that I've ever seen. And we already mentioned the average scoring margin throughout the course of the year against a very quality schedule. Obviously, that is one of the more impressive runs in terms of that level of dominance consistently throughout the course of the year that I've ever seen. And then one of the other big takeaways for me coming out of last night. So going back to Nick Saban's first national championship at Alabama in 2009. During the course of these last 12 seasons, and this is something that just further cements him as arguably the best coach in college football history and one of the best coaches overall in football history. During the course of these last 12 seasons at Alabama, those 12 seasons have consisted of 6 national championships, 7 conference championships, and an overall record while playing in the SEC of 151-15 during the course of these last 12 years.
Pretty good.
50, pretty good.
That's right. Yeah, John, this, obviously an undefeated team specifically is pretty rare at Alabama under Nick Saban. It's rare in college football, period. But this, if we're comparing, let's maybe limit the discussion to Nick Saban's best team. If we're comparing this team to 2009, why would this one get the edge over Nick Saban's other undefeated team, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, first I just want to say, I totally agree with Zenith. I almost think you have to break up this argument into eras. Nebraska was incredible and was as dominant as anybody, but the game has changed so incredibly much since then. It's really hard to compare a dominant Nebraska team to this. I think even within, that 2009 team was 11 years ago. That's not that long ago, but just look at the way the game has changed. And so, one of our colleagues is kind of working on a story around those two teams now. And it's hard for me to look at these two teams and, look at that 2009. Terrence Cody was a great player. Terrence Cody probably could play one series now, and then he'd be gassed based on the tempo that this Alabama team puts out there. And so there's just a lot of guys on that 2009 Alabama team that were built for that moment to be great, that given the way offenses have changed, I don't think could really play much now against this 2020 Alabama offense. And so I think for this moment, it's easy to say the 2020 team is better. 2009 team was, Saban's first at Alabama. There's something that's always going to be special about that. But like Matt said, this was an incredibly dominant season. There was, so much stress and pressure that always comes with being in Alabama, but certainly with COVID-19 and the daily testing and not being able to be a normal college kid as part of this greater goal to try to win a national championship makes it, easy for me to say I think this is his best team given all the different circumstances. And I think just in terms of a big picture look, again, if you kind of break it down into eras, I do think what's kind of interesting is that you can make an argument that the last 3 national championship teams, Clemson undefeated, LSU undefeated, and now Alabama undefeated, each of them has an argument and has made an argument they are the best team ever. And so, who knows? Next year, some team might go undefeated and be the next one to claim they're the best ever. But just between these 2019 and 2020 LSU and now Alabama, both of those I think have fair arguments. I think I would probably give the edge a little bit to Alabama just on some of the things that Zenitz hit on earlier, the teams they had to beat. But that LSU team last year was very good.
One thing I'll add in that makes it easy in terms of just picking this as Saban's best team at Alabama. So with the exception of 2009, all the other teams, all the other national championship teams lost a game. 2009 had 4 games that were decided by 10 points or fewer, including one game against Lane Kiffin in Tennessee that obviously came down to a blocked field goal that was necessary in order to win that game. You were never a field goal deciding a game this year. And again, you only had one game the entire year that was decided by less than 15 points, let alone 4 that were decided by 10 points or fewer.
Matt, I will say, like 2009, this year, Lane Kiffin probably came as close to scaring this team as anybody else did.
Did a good job also.
Who did you say?
Florida in the SEC title game did some good things.
For sure, yes, I agree.
Credit to John's guy, Dan Mullen. Did some good things.
I mean, if you go back to 2009, the 2 toughest challenges that Alabama faced that year, that Tennessee game and the SEC championship game in which Dan Mullen was the offensive coordinator. So we're just doing a big loop through time. There's nothing that actually new happening. It's just slight variations.
It's all flat circle.
That's right. We're in the multiverse of Alabama football at this point, and it's all just slightly different one way or the other.
We're in the Marvel reference.
Had to do it. The
verge of Wanda and Vision coming out. It makes it even more impressive that you were able to work that in. I guarantee it's recently you've seen the previews. I'm sure you started to read the reviews.
They hammered it with it. They hammered us with it last night on the broadcast. So. So listen, going forward here, we're going to be getting news about guys declaring for the NFL draft in the next week or so here. We're probably not expecting anything remotely close to what we saw a year ago, where so many guys announced that they were coming back for another season, regardless of the fact that all of these guys were given a blanket waiver by the NCAA to return if they want to. So it's an option on the table for anybody who wants to come back next year. But this team has a lot of guys with very heavy NFL, a lot of NFL buzz going for them right now. So, working off the assumptions we have of the guys who we expect to leave at this point, how do you guys see this team going forward into 2021? How big of a rebuild job does Nick Saban have on his hands heading into next season? And I'll start with you, John.
Well, I've learned my lesson on this because I've thought he had bigger rebuild projects in the past, and then they find a way to be dominant again. So I think we can just assume that they will probably be extremely good again next year. They're losing a lot of pieces on offense. Likely, I'm sure we lose some on defense too. But again, I just remember thinking last year when they lost Tua and Ruggs and Judy and all those different guys and Jedrick Wills, like you thought, man, that offense is probably going to take a step back next year. They lost all these guys, and yet the offense was even better this year. So I think they're going to lose a lot of big pieces, guys that you probably fell in love with this year. They will almost certainly lose 3 of the top 5 finalists for the Heisman Trophy. That's incredible. That's a massive loss. But we know the way that Alabama recruits. We know the way that Nick Saban has assembled talent there, that even if there's a step back, I don't think it's going to be some massive thing. I think they will find a way to still be very successful next year. And I'm sure as all these early top 25 rankings come out, they're probably going to be 1, 2, or 3 in every single one of them.
Matt, where do you see as kind of the biggest potential drop off for this team? Or we could phrase it as the area where they'll need to do the most work to kind of get back up to an elite level between now and the start of next season.
I don't know about area of most concern at this point, but it's tough when you lose most likely 3 of the top 5 guys in the Heisman running, as John pointed out, to go along with the Outland Trophy winner, the Remington winner, some key pieces along that offensive line, and then some guys defensively also. But the biggest thing I'll say is they have done, and I'm not saying anything groundbreaking here, they've done a great job from a recruiting standpoint, continued to do that to the point where they're going to be okay. And whether it's next year or the year after that, it's not going to be long before you see Alabama competing for a national championship once again. And it would not surprise me whatsoever if they end up being more competitive for something like that next year than maybe people would assume right now based off what they're about to lose. Because when you look at the roster that they're going to have, it may most likely be losing Mac Jones, but you have a very, very talented young guy ready to step in at quarterback in Bryce Young to go along with some skill guys to go along with him, some talented young skill guys that I think people are going to be impressed with what they see from those guys next year when they get their chance. And guess what? Lose some key guys off the offensive line also, but still bring back Evan Neal and potentially some other guys to go along with that have contributed this year and have the best offensive line recruiting class in college football history coming in, where those guys will probably factor into the competition also. And then we'll see what happens defensively. But it's not just going to be some significant drop-off for Alabama where it goes from like LSU last year winning the national championship and having a 500 season this year. It's not going to be anything like that. And even with what they lose, you would still be hard-pressed to find many, if any, more talented teams across the board from a talent standpoint in the SEC or the country than what Alabama is going to have next year. And that quarterback, Bryce Young, is going to be very good. So I hope people in the college football world are ready for that and just we'll see what he's able to do when he gets his opportunity. But I know Alabama people are optimistic about what he's going to be capable of when he steps into his opportunity.
That's the tease we're looking for there from Matt Zenitz. We want that scoop to hear what Alabama's feeling about their quarterback situation. So very interesting to hear. We will certainly see as this plays out. Hopefully we get something resembling a normal spring practice this year. We weren't able to get that for you last year, so we kind of came into this season blind. And we'll definitely be keeping you guys posted. There will be a lot of news, even though today feels like a day for celebrating for Alabama fans. It's not going to be long before it feels like the news cycle is moving forward again. So we'll be on top of all of it. John, travel back safely to Alabama, and thanks for all the work you did down there in Miami. Matt, continue to kick the butts of the SEC reporting world as you've continued to do. And we'll see everybody next week as we start moving forward to the 2021 football season.
Andrews Sports Medicine, aggressively pursuing victory over injury. Call 205-939-3699.